Thank you, Ridan and Marge, for this interview and this
My pleasure.
conversation on... Let me start by quoting the French philosopher André Malraux. And he supposedly said, the 21st century is going to have to be spiritual, otherwise there won't be a 21st century. So what do you think of the declaration or the claim that in a similar way, the Hare Krishna, Vaishnavism in the West, among Westerners, will have to be in terms of Western clothes, Western cultural, external cultural language, otherwise there just won't be?
Well, one thing that has often plagued religious societies throughout history is hypocrisy. And so it seems odd to emphasize so much as we do, because it's emphasized in our sacred texts, that we are not the body, we're eternal souls, and yet to give so much importance to dress, because if I'm not my body, if I'm a soul, I'm even less the clothes on my body. That's another level removed. It's another step removed from me, the soul. I think we could make a reasonable argument from sociology and our own purposes that we should, be decent. We should dress decently. We should, I believe, dress in a way which is, as far as possible, culturally neutral. We know that there's a big emphasis now on diversity, but the reality is a little different in the sense that here I am, where I stay in LA, and it's just a 15 to 20 minute walk to UCLA, which is one of the best universities anywhere. And I do, when I walk there, which I do at least a few times a week, and I've been doing that for many years, I do little cultural anthropology, like how are students dressed? And it hasn't changed very much at all since I went to college. That would be, maybe 55 years ago, over half a century ago, and students pretty much dress the same. Just simple, comfortable pants, a shirt. Of course, the weather here in Los Angeles allows a certain casualness of dress, but it hasn't changed that much. So we are trying to communicate. It seems to me that dressing normally within the cultural context we are in is very similar to speaking the local language. If I'm trying to communicate or explain Krishna consciousness, let's say in Los Angeles or Milwaukee or wherever, somewhere in America, and I'm not speaking to an immigrant community that mostly speaks a different language, but let's say I'm just speaking to people who've been in America for a little while and speak English as their first language, so I'm going to speak to them in English. Why would I speak to them in a language they don't really understand very well? A vocabulary, a syntax, they don't understand that well. Similarly, why would I distance myself from the people I'm trying to teach by dressing in a way which just makes me odd and exotic? Now, a certain percentage of people in the world like odd and exotic. That's their thing. But not for most people. And to verify that, just go walk out on the street in a, let's say, an area which is reasonably, not rich, but just comfortable. People in that area, a majority of them are educated. And you'll see that dress standards in America are not kaleidoscopic. There's always some new fashion, and there are people in the entertainment industry desperate for attention that have to dress like this or like that. But in general, there is a stable, now pretty old standard. So that I believe, because as representatives of Krishna or God, it's very important to us not to discriminate and not to favor. As Krishna says in the Gita, we want to give everyone the same equal chance. And so if I dress in a very exotic way, I may be facilitating other people in their approach to Krishna because, they like that particular ethnicity or whatever. But I'm creating a wall of separation between myself and the vast majority of the population. Let's say where I live in California or in Mexico, or throughout the United States. So to me, it's not a question of my personal taste or what I like, it's the opposite. It's a question of what makes it easier for people to approach me, to ask any questions they have, to inquire further about our philosophies. I'm trying to facilitate, not make things more difficult.
If we accept the premise that theologically and historically Vaishnavism is a tradition that never had a distinct
dress code,
distinct dress code, then as a historian, what's your commentary, what's your take on what happened in ISKCON? Because in ISKCON today, right, we see a state of affairs where many leaders, many devotees, the majority, we would honestly say, believe that there is such a thing as devotional dress. Vaishnavism has a distinct uniform that distinguishes.
Well, that's you're asking about certain socio-historical or even psychological movements, Prabhupada has his own opinion on that question, which is in Veda-based, the most authoritative database of Prabhupada's statements, and I think it's
right here.
Yeah, devotee asked Prabhupada about that. Why do we dress this way? He was a brahmachari in the saffron robes, and Prabhupada said, because you wanted to. I never said you had to do that. So yeah, here are some quotes. These are just similarly. This is Prabhupada. If our purpose is Krishna consciousness, either I dress myself in this orange color, or either you dress in coat, pant, and shirt. Oh, there's no difference. There is no difference because the aim is the same. And there are so many quotes like that from Prabhupada.
And there's throngs of them.
Yeah.
One of the arguments we hear for wearing traditional Indian clothes is that there's some sort of the equivalent of the imitatio Christos, like people who embody so they want to get.
Prabhupada once said to me personally, that was foolish. Prabhupada said, because if you want to imitate Chaitanya, then just walk around barefoot. Don't take planes, don't drive cars, don't have a GPS. Chaitanya never used a computer. He didn't have a cell phone. So if you want to do it, do it. Of course, you'll be sort of a freak of nature in the minds of most people, but that's very selective. Because we're using, Chaitanya never used a toaster oven, but I do.
So we're basically throwing away Yukta Vairagya.
Yeah. It's and also, even the non-devotees that we're trying to, enlighten, they know that dressing this way or that way is not a big deal in terms of loving God or serving God. It's kind of a sad situation where the so-called fallen souls that we're trying to save have a better, more intelligent understanding of certain things that we are doing than we do.
If there's a link, what is this link then between this emphasis on wearing Indian clothes by the Westerners?
I think that has to be explained by psychology and sociology. It can't be explained philosophically. So if we're looking for a philosophical explanation, you're going to look high and low and not find one. There is no philosophical explanation. The explanation is psychological and sociological. It's not philosophical.
Is there a link between what's going on and what we talk about in terms of the the takeover, and this, no, without offending any Vaishnava who have Indian bodies, but the demographic sort of takeover of ISKCON by the Indian diaspora. Is there a link?
Yeah, I don't think they're taking over. I think by default they're just the ones doing the work.
Yeah.
I mean, someone has to pay to keep the temples going, and they're the ones stepping forward. Someone has to serve the deities. Someone has to just maintain and so I give them great credit. They're heroes in their own way because they're stepping forward to keep everything going, to keep the lights on, to keep the deities worship. So there's no criticism of them. I mean, much to the contrary, they deserve a lot of praise. The problem is that the Western preaching is just MIA. I mean, there are some very laudable preaching programs going on in the Western world to Western people, but not enough to make ISKCON relevant in the West, outside the Indian diaspora. I mean, if you took a survey, even how many people have heard of the Hare Krishna movement in America, it's not going to be a big number. And Prabhupada had a very big vision of saving America, saving the world, establishing the Yuga Dharma, the spiritual process for this age, and that's light years away, and we're not moving toward it. It's not that, well, we're not there yet, but we're steadily making progress. The one area where there is progress, and again, this is due to the sincerity and intelligence of many devotees from a Hindu background and many devotees from a Western background, and that is establishing rational, effective social structures in ISKCON. For example, care for the elderly, or educational programs, Sunday schools, distribution of literature. Although ISKCON seems oblivious for the most part to whether or not, or to the need to actually give out books that people can read and understand. That doesn't all seem to be important. So, but there are many good devotees, and who are admirable, and who are devoted and working sincerely, working hard for the mission. Many very admirable devotees in the Western world. However, and devotees from a Hindu background, of course, now they're Vaishnavas, but they deserve to be praised. They're great souls who have sincerely stepped forward to.
Yeah, they stepped up.
Yes. So it's nothing like a takeover. It's just sort of like, well, if no one else can do it, we'll do it.
But would have the Western mission been stronger if, since the last 50 years, devotees had placed less stress on Indian clothes and had, especially the householders, adjusted to a local way of dressing? Like, I believe, for example, that someone like, with all the admiration I have for them, like a Kalakanta Prabhu or a Vaisheshik Prabhu, wonderful senior grasa devotees, perhaps if they had adjusted to a more local culture, when they were in the prime and the beginning of their householder life, perhaps by now today they would have as many, wonderful Indian disciples, but many, many more local, white, black, Hispanic disciples as well. So as a whole, individually and as a whole, do you think we would have had more success if?
Well, they're such good devotees. I mean, and I admire very much their service. So I don't want to criticize them directly or indirectly. I will say that at this point in history, I believe that it's pretty obvious if you pay attention to history, if you pay attention to social science, that we need to establish, or not establish, wrong word, we need to fortify and expand our Western mission. And Prabhupada himself talks about this, the need for this. I've, quoted these things so many times. Prabhupada talks about it often in the Bhagavatam, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in other books. So there's, indisputable evidence that Prabhupada himself wanted us to become known as American Vaishnavas.
There's even that quote with, Balavanta Prabhupada.
Yeah, yeah. So,
What's the future?
well, in a sense, it depends on all of us. The future depends on all of us, and I feel, of course, that I should do more. I don't want to criticize others or blame others. Rather, if I'm going to criticize anyone, I should probably criticize myself. And I've tried to do something, but I feel like I could have done more, or now I should do more. So I think Krishna will be more pleased if I criticize myself and not other senior devotees.
No, I say that. I mean, I know I feel guilty about having
No,
mentioned these names. I respect them fully. I feel like I'm a bench warmer on the Lakers, for example, and LeBron James and other big players, and it's like, guys, you're playing with unnecessary lead in your sneakers. Like, take it out, and then we'll score a lot more points. We'll win the title and so on.
Well, maybe Krishna again. I don't want to directly or indirectly. I don't want to say that these illustrious godbrothers have lead in their sneakers, but I will say that there's an urgent need to do more, and I hold myself responsible. I don't want to criticize the others, but I think I could do more, and I should try to do more actively.
But as far as Prabhupada, you agree that from all the quotes we have from him, he seemed to be very much in the mood of, stunnist, like, come as you are, as long as you're clean and respectable, and that seems to kind of echo what the Bhagavatam says too, Maharaj, right? Am I wrong?
No, of course. There's no dress code in the Bhagavatam. There's no dress code in the Bhagavad Gita. There's no uniforms. In fact, actually, ironically, there is a dress code in the Bhagavatam, but it's something obviously inappropriate today. Like for example, sannyasis have basically three options: streaking, going naked, which not really viable for many reasons nowadays. Another option is tree bark. I wonder what they did, how they wore tree bark back then, before they invented Velcro. Maybe someone just sewed it for them or whatever. But naked tree bark with or without Velcro, and deerskin, which Lord Chaitanya rejected. It said in the Bhagavatam, renunciates should wear deerskin, but then Lord Chaitanya told renunciates not to because they're details. It's very easy to prove that the dress codes which are in the Bhagavatam and which Lord Chaitanya would never want us to follow, even though it's the Bhagavatam, there's just time and place things. And the real issue is, for example, Lord Chaitanya was Krishna himself, yet he adopted the order and the dress of a sannyasi so that people listen to him. So when you look at the acharyas, they're pragmatists. It's stated in the Bhagavatam, in the prayers of Queen Kunti, where she says that Krishna, you appear before us, nato natya dharojita, like an actor in costume. So whatever Krishna wore 5,000 years ago, it was just an act. It was like an actor in costume. It wasn't like the eternal dress of the spiritual world. We find evidence of that. Nato natya dharojita, like an actor in costume. And then in the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, it said, Kritavan kila karmani saharamena Keshava, that Keshava performed his pastimes together with his brother Balaram, Guda Kapita Manusha, disguised, pretending to be a human being.
What does that imply? That's not the original form of Krishna? Or?
No.
Or the original...
But the externals, how he dressed, did he use, what kind of... What do they call it?
Trappings?
No, the Indian mascara. cudgel. So those are all just cultural details. And we don't live in that culture anymore. So there are injunctions in the Bhagavatam about how to dress. None of the acharyas follow those injunctions because they're not so appropriate for today. And that's all in the category of details, not basic principles. So to mistake a
Principle.
to mistake a basic principle for a detail, or to think a basic principle is a detail, or a detail is a basic principle, just means that one is not a spiritual scientist. If you take a detail, which is supposed to undergo a time and place evaluation, if you take that and a detail like dress, which Prabhupada says is a dead thing, it's not our real interest, then one simply is not a spiritual scientist. I mean, the fact that a science exists, whether it's a science of metals or or medical science or science of engineering, there is a science. But if there's no scientists around, the science won't help. So Prabhupada did give us a spiritual science. The question is now, do we have leaders who are spiritual scientists, who actually know all these powerful statements Prabhupada made?
Well, to play the devil's advocate, because we'll hear, and then I'll finish with this, there are quotes in the Veda base where Prabhupada seems to, for example, I'll quote you three. He talks about how someone looks much more beautiful in Vedic dress. He historically brought back saris from India for his first female disciples. The analogy, like for saffron-clad, dhoti-wearing brahmacharis, and they look like angels from Vaikuntha.
However, that last quote, the other ones are not very important. That last quote is very interesting because in my paper, Understanding Prabhupada, I point out the two very different ways, you could say opposite ways, that Prabhupada uses the English word opinion. Common English word opinion. And Prabhupada often said, "This is not my opinion. This is the absolute truth." He said it publicly all the time. And so he would say that about the basic philosophical principles. And he would say, as I proved in my essay, that
the link will be in the description.
That I never gave you my opinion. When did I ever give my opinion? This is not my opinion. And then there's a whole other group of statements where Prabhupada says, well, my opinion is, or that's just my opinion. And then he says, I never gave my opinion. If you look, whenever Prabhupada says, it is not my opinion, I never gave my opinion, he's talking about principles and descriptions directly found in the scriptures. And when Prabhupada says, well, my opinion is, that's just my opinion, which he also says often, he's talking about things that are not in scriptures. Like, let's say you want to cook lunch today, and you say, well, I'd rather cook cabbage than parsley, and it's not an absolute truth. It's personal taste. And so, Prabhupada once wrote to me when I was a householder in 1971 in Gainesville, and I'd asked him something. He wrote to me and he was explaining about what he called philosophical speculation. And he said that, he gave the example that Krishna says, I'm the taste in water, soham apsu konteya. So if you speculate, is that really true? That's mental speculation. If you accept that Krishna's statement is true, but then try to understand, well, how is it true? What does that mean? That's philosophical speculation, which we are allowed to do. So, we have to be spiritual scientists. And there's so many quotes from Prabhupada. So all the people who claim they're, big, all people that claim that they are strictly following Prabhupada, if you don't understand the difference between a basic principle and a detail, then you don't understand the spiritual science. That's in chapter 6 of Nectar Devotion, stated by Rupa Goswami, and then by Prabhupada translating it.
Isn't there a debate between precisely what is a principle, what is a debate, what is a detail?
Oh, that's, any child can understand that. I mean, when Prabhupada says, first of all, how to dress is not listed in the Nectar Devotion as one of the basic principles, and if someone thinks that the clothes you wear are a fundamental principle of Bhakti Yoga, first of all, Prabhupada said, no, here's a quote from Prabhupada, we are not concerned with dress. Dress is a dead thing. So if someone's trying to argue that these so-called uniforms or, devotional clothes and so on, these are basic principles. They're really, really far from understanding what our philosophy is. There's so many quotes from Prabhupada saying that, the clothes are just a dead thing. We don't care about clothes. We care about the nature of the soul within the
spiritual advancement.
Yeah, so we need to be spiritual scientists, not just... But that's the problem. It's just like the problem with so many of these scientists is that they don't study philosophy anymore. So therefore they just come to very irrational conclusions. Illogical, literally illogical. And so similarly, the way I put it, it seems like for every real philosopher in ISKCON, there are 100 astrologers. The Prabhupada said we have the mass, we need the class. So the class means educated, intelligent people that can understand and then present Krishna consciousness as a spiritual science. Otherwise, if one just makes outlandish claims about devotional dress and it doesn't really affect people's opinion of us, these things are just bizarrely out of touch with reality.
Unscientific.
It's funny because Prabhupada once said, if someone's a gentleman, they don't care about dress. Prabhupada said that at a time when, wearing clothes that were strange was a huge fad in America. Everyone was doing that.
And even the hippie, like I typed on ChatGPT once, what's the actual percentage of the hippie community in America in the 60s? And it's actually really small. So even then...
Well, there weren't only hippies. Like, for example, like I was in Berkeley. That was in the East Bay, and the West Bay was San Francisco. And the hippies were in San Francisco. I mean, it's not that they were all in San Francisco, but Berkeley was more political activism, people studying. And they weren't hippies. I mean, they wouldn't have called themselves hippies.
But it was still hip to dress differently.
Yeah, and to be kind of a freak.
Still, I would bet that even that population was still really small compared to mainstream America.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Thank you. Any concluding words?
The truth is what works. Yeah, I'm trying to spread Krishna consciousness in a certain way, and it's working. We're attracting, and almost all the people we're attracting are educated professional people. And they're not just coming for Hatha Yoga, they're coming for Krishna consciousness. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to do things in a certain way at Krishna West, and, the very, very strong majority of the people that we're attracting are educated professional people, which is not always the case. Western people. And not always the case with general preaching. So, paradoxically, ironically, one powerful evidence that everyone really knows that the straightforward, orthodox ISKCON presentation is a non-starter is that almost every time, all around the Western world, when a devotee wants to do quote-unquote Western preaching, the first question they ask themselves is, what's the disguise? In other words, Vedic Cultural Center, whatever that means, yoga. Why is it that we don't just have Bhakti Yoga centers? It's always something else. It's always yoga, or astrology, or Ayurveda, or that Vastu, which I won't comment on. I think of that. That's the first question. Generally, devotees don't just open up a bhakti yoga center. They peddle it, market it as something else. But that's what they do. I mean, it's when a devotee wants to preach to Western people, the first question is, what's the disguise? What do we say it is? You know, Hatha yoga, or it's just funny how there's so much this devotees, and I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just a human trait. I don't know if it's more of a devotee trait than a general human trait, but when someone starts doing something, everyone does it. Like I remember, you know, some devotees somehow, a very long time ago, started selling incense.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, but then everybody did that. And then one temple started, you know, making candles in the temple, selling candles, and everyone sold candles. And then they had the scam where they bought, you know, that's when they used to make just regular vinyl albums. And so, you know, these record companies, for every album that really sells, maybe there's like, you know, a dozen or a couple dozen that don't sell. And they're just stuck with them. They're in the warehouse. So I remember in those days you'd get them for like, you know, a nickel an album or something. Or less. And so devotees would, I remember they'd go to, for some reason, again, so one devotee, what they did is they went to they'd go to the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles. You know this?
No, I know the DMV.
And they'd be in a van, they'd call people over in the DMV parking lot, and they'd say, "Good morning, we're from radio station KRSNA." And then they'd ask them a couple of questions like, you're on the air. And at the end, okay, now we'd like to give you this album. You know, we're doing this for charity. And then everyone started doing that. Everyone started going to the DMV, and everyone, you know, to sell these records. And everyone stayed in the van and called people over to the van. And everyone said, "We're from radio station KRSNA." And when they made candles, everyone made the same candles. And then they had, you know, knockoff paintings, you know, in the days when, I don't know, Hong Kong or Vietnam, all these countries, you could get very, very cheap labor. So it's funny because in the West, they have this whole romantic idea of the artist. But there, you know, some little guy would just be sitting on the ground there with a little sponge and a few brushes. You know, in 20 minutes, he'd knock off a Cézanne or a, you know, Van Gogh. Can't imagine why anyone would want it. Anyway, Van Gogh, but they just started sort of, you know, neurotic flower vases, you know, vibrating. But anyway, so then everyone did that, and then they started, you know, selling paintings, and then everyone was selling paintings, and then they found that, well, you know, fundraising, you know, the Indians, it's the best fundraising thing. And I don't mean to say the devotees don't care about the Indian devotees or they were tricking them. I mean, I think they really are accepted and respected certainly by any good devotee as saintly Vaishnavas. But what I mean to say is everybody kind of, it's funny because Prabhupada said a few times, I looked this up and I wrote a research thing on it. A few times Prabhupada said that, you know, you can call women Mataji. What's interesting is Prabhupada never did it. I checked the entire Vedabase. There's no evidence that Prabhupada ever called a woman Mataji. He never did it. Not only that, it's not even an Indian custom. It's a Bengali custom. And I've spoken to educated Indians from other parts of India who think it's strange. So, but then everyone does that. And so now, of course, with the internet and people live in different places, so there's more diversity of opinion, but so why do devotees do certain, or like things which are just like bizarre and irrational? For example, you can't go on the altar if you have stitched clothing. No one has ever explained to me scientifically why stitches are impure. And there are pictures of Prabhupada installing Radha Krishna, worshipping Radha Krishna with sewn clothing, but it's just some old book in Sanskrit says something, or someone heard something from someone in India, and then it what Prabhupada actually said is ignored, or what Prabhupada actually did, but some baseless superstition travels like wildfire all around the ISKCON world. I mean, and so, we have so many pictures of Prabhupada. Or another one, which is one of my favorites, is I call it sort of like the Harry Potter version of Bhakti Yoga, and that is that when you're chanting Gayatri mantra, you have to cover your right hand, the one that's on the thread, with the left hand, so that some kind of hobgoblins or something don't come and steal your pious activities. It's amazing that there's all these malevolent beings floating around the atmosphere, and they can subtly penetrate right hands but not left hands. First interesting thing. They can penetrate a right hand, but they bounce off cloth. Even like, it's all natural cloth. They just bounce. They bounce off cloth. They bounce off left hands. They penetrate right hands. We never find out really who they are, what the process is. They just sort of bring in some kind of subtle tools that pump out all of your pious credits. It's just, I just find it bizarre. But that's what you get. Even when Prabhupada was here, he used to always say, my disciples are not reading my books.
So you think it's coming from not reading Prabhupada books?
Or just not being philosophical. I remember that one time when I was GBC of Atlanta, one nice girl came and joined, moved into the Brahmacharya ashram. She came to me after a few days, and she was very rattled. And she told me that, I thought this was a spiritual community. Yeah. Said, well, I was sleeping. I fell asleep, and I drooled a little bit when I woke up. The girls in the women's ashram going crazy, like, going to bring in ghosts and evil spirits because you drooled. And so you have to, shower and change your clothes. It's just, I thought this is a spiritual community. It's more like some kind of black magic cult. And so,
she said those very words.
Yeah, something very close. I'm just closely paraphrasing her. So, where's the spiritual science, philosophy, real philosophy? Not just, Prabhupada said that, religion without philosophy is just sentimental or fanatical. And everyone thinks if you know the philosophy, you know philosophy. But it's not just a question of memorizing a credo, even if that confession of faith is true, as is the case in Krishna consciousness. But philosophy means you know how to reason. You know how to reason. So, what can be done? Prabhupada said we have the masses, we need the class. And so I think, ISKCON definitely, I think the only thing the world will really accept from us on a large scale, outside of India and diaspora Indians, is spiritual science.
Spiritual science.
A real spiritual science. Not all these superstitions, not all these legends and astrology. I was with Prabhupada when the first devotees came into his room and asked him if they could do astrology in ISKCON. Prabhupada said no. Of course, they do it anyway, but he said the essence of Bhakti Yoga is depending on Krishna, and that this would sort of weaken one's dependence on Krishna. Depend on the stars. Okay, so maybe we'll stop there.
Thank you.